Piero Lumumba here at the Swara Acacia Conservancy in Machakos County in the Republic of Kenya, and we continue with our conversations on Africa, focusing on some of the big names in the continent of Africa in the struggle for liberation. And one of such people is Bantu Stephen Biko. Bantu Stephen Biko from South Africa, the Eastern Cape, emerges in South African politics when apartheid regime is at its worst. He emerges at a time when the struggle for independence, the struggle to eliminate apartheid had been carried over a long period, remembering as we do that as early as 1912, the ANC had been in the arena. There had been great freedom fighters. In 1960, Robert Mangaliso Sobukwe is dissatisfied with the pace of the struggle for independence and founds the Pan-African movement. And at that time, Biko begins to emerge. And he emerges as a young student, particularly when he joins the University of Natal in 1966. He takes the view that both the ANC and the PSC and all the other political parties are not recognizing something that is important and something that he thinks should be factored into the struggle against apartheid. And there is a sense in which I've always felt that Biko was taking the cue from Sobukwe when he forms his Black consciousness movement, because Sobukwe had said, when he was asked, which race do you belong to, he said, there is only one race, the human race. And when Bantu Stephen Biko joins the South African student movement or association, he becomes very active. And he is emphasizing the fact that one of the things that Black people must do is to identify who they are, to be conscious of who they are, because he takes the view that unless Black Africans are conscious of who they are, then they cannot, in the nature of things, fight the apartheid movement in the manner that it ought to be fought. And of course, Bantu Stephen Biko is expelled as a student leader, and he is expelled simply because he is seen to be an agitator, and the then Minister for Justice identifies him as one of the big troublemakers. But his problems do not stop there. Bantu Stephen Biko begins to write, and he writes under a pseudonym, Frank Tok. And he does not escape the eyes of the South African intelligence. They begin to follow him, and they begin to follow some of the things that he's doing. That is when he creates or becomes part of the creation of the Black People's Convention. The Black People's Convention is a convention that brings together people who believe that Blacks should identify themselves, and beyond identification should recognize who they are, and beyond recognizing who they are should have a consciousness of what they ought to do, and that is the basis of the Black consciousness movement. And this is what Biko is known for. That Biko then begins to talk about who Blacks are, what they should be doing. And one can begin to understand that he is getting some of his ideas from individuals such as Malcolm X in the United States of America. He's getting some of his ideas from the Black Panther movement. He's getting some of his ideas from people like Martin Luther King Jr., getting some of his ideas from people like W.E.B. Du Bois, who are talking about Pan-Africanism. And when he is asked, this Black consciousness that you are talking about, is it not racism in reverse? Are you not simply saying that Blacks should be racist as against white? He says no. He actually says that being Black is not a matter of pigmentation. Being Black is a matter of being conscious and be recognizing the fact that you are part of the African continent. In a nutshell, Biko is echoing something that had been said by other greats. that you are not an African because you are born in Africa, but you are an African because Africa is born in you. And that is very Nkurumaist. And he articulates it so well that one can see the problems that then begin to be there for him. Once, of course, he is involved in this particular exercise, running up to the time that he has been expelled from the medical school in the University of Natal. And it is important to pause here and to understand what his predicament was. That he joins the medical school at the University of Natal, but he joins the black section. That is how apartheid was working, that even in matters as grave as medicine, you are segregated. And he begins his writings. One of his most iconic books is I Write What I Like. And you can see the push at that time. What is the push? The push at that time is that most of the leaders in the struggle for independence, the struggle against apartheid, are either in jail or they have been exiled or are under restriction. The Rivonia trials had taken place. Robert Sobukwe is no longer in the scene. Letter bombs are being sent to people and they are dying. And the young people are the ones who now come to the fore when the apartheid regime wants to enforce the use of the Afrikaans language as a mandatory language in all schools. And he begins to write. And those of us who remember the 1976 Soweto massacre, where the young children come out and they are massacred in their thousands, some say, then you begin to see that Bantu Stephen Biko is accused of having agitated the young people. During that period, a very interesting thing happens in the life of Bantu Stephen Biko. He is visited by a man called Donald Woods. And Donald Woods holds the view that Biko is a racist. And he visits Biko with that mindset. But after he has had a conversation, several conversations with Bantu Stephen Biko, he changes his mind because Biko convinces him that when we talk about black consciousness, we are not being racist. What we are saying is that if we want to create a South Africa which will accommodate everybody, you need black people who are conscious, black people who are confident, black people who are going to participate in the economic and political life of South Africa in a meaningful way. And it is instructive that in 1987, long after Bantu Stephen Biko had died, and I'll come back to that, Donald Woods actually does make a film, I Cry Freedom. That movie that dramatizes the life of Bantu Stephen Biko is, of course, produced by Richard Attenborough and is one that documents in very great detail what it is that Bantu Stephen Biko was doing. But before the dramatization, after the Soweto massacre in 1976, 1977, Bantu Stephen Biko is arrested and is accused of many things, including agitation, including incitement of young people. And he is arrested and detained. And he is detained naked. He is tortured on several occasions. He is moved from the point of his arrests in the Eastern Cape, and he is moved for hundreds of miles naked to Pretoria. And he is beaten during that period. When he gets into hospital, of course, he has suffered brain damage and he dies. And you only have to listen to some of the speeches of somebody who was his spouse and somebody that I know, Ramphele, who became his wife or his counterpart during the period that he lived, to know how Bantu Stephen Biko suffered. And of course, he became a martyr. A martyr that when Nelson Rolihlahla Mandela left prison, and even before when he was in Robben Island, he says this Bantu Stephen Biko will be remembered as the light that ignited the fire in the world. And that fire is the fire that will consume the apartheid regime. And I dare say that Bantu Stephen Biko will be remembered for a number of things in the fight against apartheid. Why do I say so? I say so because Bantu Stephen Biko enters into the political arena in 1966 when there is a sense in which the ANC is becoming tired. It is becoming tired because her leading lights within South Africa are in prison. Nelson is in prison, Govan is in prison, Walter Sisulu is in prison, Ahmed Kathrada is in prison, Oliver Tambo is in exile, and Thabo Mbeki is in exile. Within South Africa, the ones who are agitating are few and far between. Tutu from the church, Cyril Ramaphosa from COSATU, Alan Busak from the church. ANC is tired. The PSC is also tired. It is tired in the sense that Sobukwe is no longer there, and a new wave of young people are coming up. And this consciousness is what catapults Bantu Stephen Biko into a totally different orbit, because through his writings, he is able to influence a new wave of South African independent fighters in primary schools, in high schools, in universities. And South African struggle and the struggle against apartheid takes a totally new trajectory after the Soweto massacres in 1976. Of course, we remember there had been the Sharpeville massacres in 1960, Sharpeville in 1969, but Soweto is unique and different. This is the first time that young people are involved intimately, and they are massacred. And they are massacred because a new consciousness has come about, and that new consciousness is a consciousness that has been planted in them by Bantu Stephen Biko. And his martyrdom then becomes a point of reference. A point of reference because he is one of the few martyrs that did not leave the country, even if he had the opportunity to do so. So Bantu Stephen Biko, a short life, a short struggle against apartheid. But what will he be remembered for? I've read and reread his book, I Write What I Think. And what he tells you there is that when you are a victim of an oppressive system, your mind must remain alive. It is no wonder that across Africa you see young men being named Biko, because Biko never dies in the minds and hearts of those who love freedom. Bantu Stephen Biko, a great and a brave warrior. Thank you very much. As we continue our discussions about the continent of Africa, we cannot conclude it in one segment. That is why we say bye-bye for now. We will come again to continue the conversation. Thank you.